Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, so I'm trying to do this thing to do with the Shakespeare play, The Tempest. This is supposed to be a brief video covering the plot of The Tempest. So if there's any students who are a little bit unsure of what exactly is happening in that poem, in that play, then this is supposed to help. Okay, so what I'm going to do is quickly go into my PowerPoint or slideshow and try and share that with you now. And as I say, it's supposed to be very brief. We'll begin at the beginning. The first thing to say is if you are watching this video, you should try to watch it at kind of a faster speed if you know how to do that. And then when you get to those moments where you feel you want to slow it down, then yeah, that's fine. You can do that. The first part is just briefly going through all of the scenes and trying to break it up and explaining what those scenes are. And then we'll kind of go scene by scene so that you can get a gauge of kind of who's in it and what are they kind of talking about. Okay, so that's my overview. This is the plot overview of The Tempest by William Shakespeare. First thing to say then is that there are several acts, several scenes. The first act, Act 1, Scene 1, is the Tempest itself. The Tempest just simply means the storm, the very short scene. Then Act 1, Scene 2, which I've called The Island, quite a lot of things happen in this segment. So what I've done is I've broken it down into 4 parts. So you have Act 1, Scene 2A, which is about Prospero and his life story, and then B, which is introduces Ariel, talks a little bit about Sycorax, the witch, and then what is confirmed is that Ariel is the willing slave. Then we have Caliban, who is introduced at the next stage. He is the unwilling slave. And then finally we end up with A Love at First Sight, which is a reference to Prospero's daughter Miranda and Ferdinand. Okay, so that's basically the outline of The Island, and then all of this is Act 1. When we move to Act 2, there's only really 2 scenes. So we move to another plot line to do with the King's Men. These are characters that were introduced in Act 1, Scene 1, and we see them again in Act 1, Act 2, Scene 1. Act 2, Scene 2 is what I've titled Comic Relief. It kind of introduces a minor moment in the play. So the minor characters are introduced in the play, and what happens is based upon the seriousness of everything that preceded it, this is supposed to be kind of a light-hearted moment. But yet the plot will thicken as we move into Act 3, which is the green color. Now, Act 3 begins, and there are 3 scenes. In Act 3, Scene 1, it begins with the betrothal, that is to say, the engagement. So this is a follow-up of Act 1, Scene 2D. You know, the scene Love at First Sight is now continues into Act 3, Scene 1. Then we have Act 3, Scene 2. This is about Caliban and the Confederates, and this is where they hatch the plan. This follows on from Comic Relief. And then we have Act 3, Scene 3, which is the last one. That's the harpy scene. This is something I would have called the banquet scene, but I've changed the name to the harpy scene because the banquet scene is a famous moment in Macbeth, and I don't want to confuse some people. So that is Act 3. And then quite quickly we move into Act 4, Scene 1, and that's the mask. It's also when Caliban and his confederates are undone. And then we move to Act 5, Scene 1, which is the very last scene, which I'm calling Revenge and Forgiveness, where everything comes to a head. And then there's also a last part, which is the epilogue, emphasizing that this is Shakespeare's last play. So that's covering the whole thing very briefly. Now, if we want to now look at Act 1, Scene 1, what I've done is I've put the main characters that are on that scene here. And then what you can see is you have Prospero, Antonio, Miranda on the side of Milan. They're in the yellow. You have Alonso, Sebastian, Ferdinand, and Claribel. They are representatives of the Kingdom of Naples. Then you have also in the green color, you can start to see that, but it's a lighter green because they are the lower ranking characters. So you have Gonzalo, Adrian, Francisco, who are actually lords. And then right at the bottom, you have Stefano and Trinculo. And then you have the boat, which is uncolored, where you have the mast and the boatswain and the mariners. And then on the island, it's in blue. You have Sycorax, who is only mentioned, and her son Caliban. You've also got Ariel and the spirits, Ariel being one of the spirits. You will also notice that those people from Milan, I made them bold, and those people of high rank, basically the royal family as such, are the font is red. Another thing to note is you have Antonio, whose writing I've done as italics, as is Alonso and Sebastian, because they become titled as the three men of sin in the harpy scene. So I've wanted to link them because that's one kind of group. You can also notice Stefano and Trinculo have got an underline, and then right at the bottom Caliban as well, because they become the confederates. So I wanted to just show you the kind of the groupings. And then finally, the Ariel and the spirits, I put them in as a blue font to represent that they are a little bit otherworldly. Okay, so what we have in the Tempest is we begin with Master Boatswain and the mariners, and they're on the boat. We also have Alonso, Sebastian, Ferdinand, Gonzalo, and they turn up and they want to know where is the master. That leads to a type of an altercation. You've also got Antonio there as well. And Adrian and Francisco, if you look at the cast list, they're also there in the stage directions. They are there, but I don't think they do much. So that's basically the first act, scene 1. As I say, the lords are looking for the master, and the master is given the boatswain a task, which is to get the boat going. There's a storm, hence the title The Tempest, and there's a shipwreck, meaning it apparently appears that they've all died. We then get to the island. So this is a big scene. We have Prospero and his life story, Act 1, Scene 2A. So clearly you're going to have Prospero and Miranda in the scene, and it's literally what it says. So Prospero goes through his life story. I think the life story can be broken into a number of segments. You have, on the one hand, what are we doing on this island? Miranda asks, how did we get here? So Prospero has to explain how he focused on his studies and he gave the management of the state or the government of Milan to his brother Antonio. And the brother conspired against Prospero and made a deal with Alonso, where he ended up paying tribute, so he gave money annually. And Alonso and his men came and threw Prospero out. They took the daughter as well, put them onto a boat, and to all intents and purposes, left them to drown out into the sea. But there was a character Gonzalo, who was charged with the job to see this through. But Gonzalo was a very merciful man, and felt sorry for Prospero and furnished him with supplies, water, food, these kinds of things, and also his books. So that explains how Prospero got his books. And miraculously, they ended up on the island. He also informs Miranda that he's aware that his enemies, Alonso, Sebastian, and his brother Antonio, have come close by the shore, so he needs to use his time wisely. I think those are the main elements of the life story. Okay, so then we move to Act 1, Scene 2B, where we are introduced to Ariel's task, little conversation explaining who is Sycorax, and we realize that Ariel is the willing slave. Miranda, you'll notice, is grayed out because Prospero puts her to sleep, and then he calls Ariel, so Ariel turns up, and he here is where we learn about how Sycorax brought Caliban to the island, how she was banished from Algiers, Algeria, and then basically she puts Ariel, punishes him because he refused to do her bidding. Presumably she was nasty, and he was trapped. Ariel was trapped inside a cloven pine, basically inside a tree, and it was howling there. But she dies, and then Prospero comes up and releases him. So that explains that. At the end of this, Ariel is very obliging, and he apologizes because what he wanted was his liberty, his freedom, but he's very happy once he hears that Prospero promises that he will set Ariel free. Then we move to Act 1, Scene 2C, which is about Caliban, the unwilling slave. So Ariel departs, and Prospero wakes up Miranda, and they go to see Caliban. That exchange is heated. Caliban is frustrated by being a slave of Prospero. There was a moment in the past where they had a good rapport, and Caliban showed the best parts of the island. This is revealed here. And Prospero also reveals that he had Caliban in his own house until Caliban tried to attack Miranda. And that explains the change of mood and how Caliban then gets placed in, well, Caliban calls it like a sty. Yeah, so that's the situation there. Prospero then threatens Caliban and says, can you just go and get the wood that we want you to fetch for us? And that's kind of the end of that. You'll notice Ariel on the right hand side, I'll try to increase the font there to emphasize how he just appears for a second because Prospero gives him an order, and that will be revealed in a minute. And he promptly disappears, and that's really the end of that scene. So we now move to Act 1, Scene 2D, and this is the last moment, the love at first sight. And in this scene, again, you have Prospero and Miranda, and Ariel brings along Ferdinand. And in this scene, Miranda ends up falling in love with Ferdinand and vice versa. Ferdinand, we learn, has been very upset about the loss of his father. So that's, I think, the main thing to say there. Oh, the last thing is that Prospero realizes, wait, I ought to test Ferdinand. What I should do is make life a little bit difficult for him in order to test him. And he kind of officially announces to Ferdinand that, wait, you are a spy on this island and you're trying to take it from me, which is ironic because Prospero had just taken the island from Caliban, you can argue. And Ferdinand tries to defend himself, but Prospero kind of does some enchantments and magic, and Ferdinand becomes very weakened, and he leaves subdued, and that's the end of that scene. So we move to Act Two. Act Two, which I've called the conspiracy generally, the whole Act Two, because at the beginning it focuses on Act Two, Scene One, on the king's men. So here we have all of the king's men yet again, and what ends up happening there, you see Ariel's font has increased because he turns up. Everyone here is kind of complaining about, well, when I say everyone, it's really Sebastian and Antonio are complaining about where they are. Alonso is grieving. Gonzalo's trying to bring everyone's mood up. And to cut a long story short, when Ariel pops up, he puts them to sleep. So what happens is everyone falls asleep apart from Antonio and Sebastian, and they hatch a plan to try to kill the king. Just like Antonio supplanted Prospero, Sebastian gets the idea from Antonio to kill his brother Alonso, and so that's the point there. It doesn't work because Ariel wakes up Gonzalo. That's the end of that scene, and they are none the wiser. Act Two, Scene Two is the comic relief. The comic relief, you begin with Caliban, who is very much complaining about having to pick up the sticks. He talks about the spirits that he's concerned about, and he sees Trincolo, not knowing who Trincolo is, and thinks he's a spirit, come to attack him, so he hides under his cloak. Trincolo is complaining about the weather, and then when there is a thunder strike, he thinks he will hide also under the cloak to get the shelter from the storm. And Stefano comes along, who's a drunken butler from the ship. So these are other stragglers from the ship who've managed to survive the tempest, and they end up coming across Caliban, and they're thinking to themselves, who is this islander? They are themselves happy to meet each other. We discover Stefano has lots of alcohol, and Caliban, after having a drink of this, starts seemingly to worship Stefano and thinks he has now a rival to defeat Prospero. So you have Stefano with a celestial liquor or drink versus Prospero, the wizard with the magical books. So that is now set up for Act 3, and that's the end of Act 2. When we move to Act 3, this is now the climax. When we get here, it begins with Act 3, Scene 1, the betrothal, because here we have the main characters of Ferdinand, who is busy sort of breaking up or moving logs, and Prospero is kind of grayed out because he comes in invisible and he's observing them, and Miranda comes along, and then they have an exchange. The conclusion of the exchange is they kind of share vows, and which effectively means that they are engaged. Okay, Prospero is surprised at how easy that was, which demonstrates that this was part of his plan. Then we move to Act 3, Scene 2, and this is the Confederates, which is a reference, it's a quote actually from later on, when Prospero is concerned with Caliban and the plot against him. This is revealed in this scene. So you have Caliban, Stefano, Trincolo, and Caliban is telling them about the best way to kill Prospero, and he lists a range of ways of killing Prospero, whereby he can get not only the island but also Miranda. So he's trying to suggest to Stefano this is worth doing. A side point here is this animosity between Caliban and Trincolo. Stefano sides with Caliban against Trincolo, but they still form a group. And during this process, you also have Ariel, who turns up, who tries to forward the plan. Ariel discovers their plot, and he ends. There's a little comedic moment, which we can just move on to the next scene, Act 3, Scene 3, still part of the climax. This is the harpy scene. So in this scene, you end up with all of the king's men again. So they are looking for Ferdinand, but they're tired. They discover a table of food presented by some spirits. As they're about to eat, Ariel presents himself as a harpy. The food kind of disappears. They are shocked, and Ariel says the famous, "You are three men of sin," singling out Antonio, Alonso, and Sebastian. And then finally, he drives them mad, and he tells them that he reminds them of the name Prospero and the wrong done to him. So they are now going to be punished. So that's actually almost the ending for them. Act 4. Now here is the falling action. We're coming to a close. It begins with the mask, and what you have is Prospero telling Ferdinand and Miranda, or telling Ferdinand specifically, that he has passed the test and that he gives his blessings to the wedding, and he decides to give a gift, which is a performance performed by the spirits, and that's the mask scene. There's much more that could be said, but I think that will be enough for now. Right at the end of the scene, you have Caliban, Stefano, and Trinculo coming to try to kill Prospero. Ferdinand and Miranda leave, they leave, and Prospero uses Ariel right at the very end to kind of entrap the Stefano, Trinculo, and Caliban using sort of secondhand clothes, princely clothes, to kind of get them sort of ensnared in a trap as such, and finally to be chased away by the spirits kind of in the form of dogs. And they kind of go off scene, and that's the end of that. It implies that they've been caught. And they've been grayed out here to represent the Caliban and the Confederates. And this is when Prospero says that quote when he announces that they have a plot against him. And finally, we get to the Act 5, the last scene, which is about revenge and forgiveness. So this is his whole plot, his whole plan. This is Prospero, who has a conversation at the beginning with Ariel. Ariel shows sympathy when Prospero asks, "How are my captives?" And what happens is Ariel says that they seem to be in a sorry state. I actually feel sorry for them. And Prospero has a change of heart. So from revenge, it switches to forgiveness. He says, "If you are able to forgive them and you're not even human, then shouldn't I, being more nobler than you?" And he has a complete turnaround. As I say, if I were to talk more about context, there's more to say about that, but I'm going to leave that now. Miranda and Ferdinand are discovered playing chess. As I say, Prospero forgives everyone. That's quite an important point, including his enemy Alonso, but also his brother Antonio and others. They end up, Ariel is called upon to get the master and the boatswain, who assure Prospero that the boat is ready. And finally, you get Caliban, Stefano, and Trinculo turn up, who Caliban actually changes his tone and apologizes. Just about, he seems to apologize. "I'll be wise hereafter," quote something like this. And Prospero seems to suggest that he has been forgiven, because he does not actually scold him in any way after this. And finally, you have the epilogue. And in the epilogue, it's really about Prospero, who does a talk, and everyone else kind of fades into the background, and it becomes more about how Prospero represents Shakespeare. And the imagery there is one of, just as Prospero is a magician with his art, his magic, Shakespeare with his art needs the audience to clap, and this is his final performance. And in order to set Prospero free, that is to say, to set Shakespeare free. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.